Hello everyone, how's it going? This is Ryan back with another video, and today we're going to be doing a Cubase video once again. So today I'm going to be showing you guys how to essentially do a basic mix on a drum kit. So in this case I've got some synths and bass and all this other stuff tracked in like a kind of pop song composition, and essentially I'm just going to mix the drums in first. My way of working is I like to always start with the drums and the bass, and then kind of build up on that. So and by that what I mean is obviously I track everything in, and then when it comes to the mixing I mix the drums and the bass, and then for example any other mid dominating instruments after that, and then the high, and so on and so forth. So yeah, typically what I like to do with the drums, I always well, first of all I like to hear it in context of everything. So just to give you guys an example of what this sounds like, I'm just going to play from bar 23 through to about bar 36, 37, just to give you a taster of what this is sounding like unmixed. So yeah, enjoy. Cool. Cool, yeah, so you get the idea. So what I like to do once I've done that is I solo the drums, just initially, and obviously I'm just going to mute the hi-hat and the crash. What I like to do is work on the foundation of the drums, so the bass drum and the snare drum, and then obviously I build everything else around that. So we'll start with our kick drum. And I always start with an EQ, assuming that you're using sampled drums, for example. I'm using Groove Agent just to give you guys an oversight, so it's already got the samples in, so there's no need to gate anything or to limit anything, do any of the drum edit and stuff. So assuming that you've obviously got past that stage, this is what I would do typically. So start with the EQ, and then what I'd sometimes do, it depends really on the feel, but I'd put some kind of compressor on it, so like whether it be a multi-band or a standard compressor, maybe a bit of saturation or distortion, and then potentially a bit of reverb. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to loop this section here, and I'm just going to, sorry, one second, loop this section here, and then I will kind of find the sweet spots for the kick drum. So the way I treat it is I like to think of the bass drum as the low, the snare as like the low mid, toms as like mid-ish, low mid, snare, sorry, was meant to be high mid, and then obviously the crashes and the cymbals and stuff will be high. So the thing I'm going to be targeting the most on the kick drum is the low end. So if I just play this, put the spectrum on, cool, probably about there. I feel like there is a good spot. I think if you go more towards this section, so for this particular kick drum, the bit that my ear kind of goes towards is the between the 100 and the 200 lines just here. But however, that's typically where I'd make my snare pop. So essentially my 9 times out of 10 I'm always going to be targeting between sort of 50 and 100 hertz. And basically the reason for that is if you go lower than that, typically a lot of speakers don't really pick up that kind of frequency, and it just sounds a bit basically. So and then we're just going to do the rest of the EQ. So just play this again. So that sounded a little bit crap in that frequency there when I was putting it here, so just dip that a little bit. And what we like to do as well with a lot of kick drums is just add a little bit of high-end presence in there, just so it kicks for a little bit on the you know, through the other instruments and stuff that are obviously dominating those fields. Just so it gives a bit more presence and you can actually hear the kick drums. So let's play it again. Just a little lift, and then what I probably will do is just bring the slightest bit off at the end, just because I don't want it to sound too trebly. And obviously I want the focus to be on that kind of lower end. So what I mean, my approach, everyone's different, is I like to start with EQ on the kick drum and then EQ on the snare and kind of do it backwards and forwards. So that's what I'm going to do in this instance, is go to the snare drum, put an EQ on there. Studio EQ is my favourite EQ. It comes within Cubase, just a standard. I mean, you've seen what it does. It's not one of those where you have to move up certain frequencies, and it just does exactly what it needs to do. It's quite simple and stuff, so cool. Let's have a quick playthrough again. So just to give you guys a fair warning, I'm going to be targeting sort of maybe around the 100 to 200 mark is my guess for the kind of boom on the snare, and then I'm going to be potentially going for some high end as well. Obviously there are presets and stuff you can use on a lot of these DAWs, so if I just put snare in, you can see here it kind of boosts here and there's high end presence and it dips a little bit. So yeah, let's have a look. A rock snare, for example, same sort of thing. So you've got this sort of pattern. We'll use this. This is just like an example, and I'll move it around accordingly. So yeah. Cool. 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 So that's what I'm happy with in terms of the EQ. So now we've got our EQs down. The next step for me is typically compression. With the kick drum, the more you compress it, the more bass that's going to be lost. So I tend to do quite a light compression on the kick drum, and then the snare gets quite a heavy compression with a little bit of attack, obviously, to have that initial hit. So we'll start with the kick drum. For the kick drum, I'm just going to use a standard compressor, I think, just to keep things simple. And I feel like this particular kick drum sound, you can do exactly what you need to do with just a single. When you start thinking about multi-band compressors, it just becomes a longer process, and for the sake of this video I'm just going to keep it simple. However, I might do a more in-depth video on multi-band compression on another future video. So yeah, let's obviously play this and just find exactly where the kick drum is going to need to be compressed. As a little bit of a guide, you want minimal gain reduction, you don't want a high ratio, and the threshold needs to be quite high, just to obviously make sure it's not being compressed too much. So let's give it a listen. Cool. I'm quite happy with that because it has that kind of, the compression brings out the high end presence in it, but then it's got that initial kind of thud, which is what I really like personally. So that's literally, that is minimal compression as it comes. The ratio is basically non-existent. There's a quite high attack, so it allows that initial hit to come in. Auto release, I mean, I feel like the detected release time is fine for that, and the analysis, I didn't want to have it sound too processed, so I didn't want 100%, but obviously I wanted there to be some kind of lift up and some kind of makeup on there, with the obviously not having it too low either, so I put it bang in the middle roughly. Cool. So same thing with the snare. The snare is going to be a lot harsher, like I said. Now, once again, there are presets for this. You've got all these different things like snare in your face, snare compression. You can do this so many different ways. I'm just going to scroll through a few examples. So tight ratio, low attack for a dance snare. Push and snare, no fucking idea what that means. That looks like a relatively low ratio. And then obviously you've got like higher attacks. This is probably something that we're going to be looking at like this here. Analysis is quite high to create that presence. Let's give this one a whirl and just play around with the template. Cool, so maybe it needs a bit of makeup on that one. Cool. So in this instance, it still sounds quite trebly. And I mean the snare sound itself is quite, no, it's not a low end snare, it's quite poppy. So there's two things you can do in this instance, and one thing I will just quickly show you. I'm going to add a second EQ. And we're just going to re-look for that booming kind of frequency. If we can't find it, that's when you can start adding potentially another snare layer. You change the snare to something that's got a bit more FUD, or that sort of thing. So let's have a little look. Cool. Cool, so just minimal, but it works. So if we look at that frequency just one more time, you'll see that in this sort of 100 to 200 thing, there's a bit of a spike compared to the other frequencies, like there. Now it is relatively high presence as well. I'm not going to change that, to be fair, but we've evened that out a little bit. To be honest, I might later down the line, I might even boost it a little bit more. So cool, that's our the basic sort of compression stuff that I like to do on both. And then when it comes to adding reverbs and saturation and stuff like that, I like to do it in context to everything. I think for the sake of this, we'll just do the saturation on the kick drum and the snare, and then after that we'll mix with everything. So what I like to do for saturation is just have a little look at this. So you can see there's already in my plugin, which is called Magneto, it's like a light distortion, that there's already templates for kick drum punch and snare punch. So I'm just going to go to kick punch and just see what it sounds like. Cool. So basically it's not overly saturated, but it's got a good level of saturation in there, just over half. The frequencies are relatively open. It takes off of that high end just a little bit, and it just, in terms of the HF adjust, so it's hard to explain. It's kind of like the high frequency gain sort of thing. It just makes it sound a little bit more trebly and a little bit more higher ranged in a sense. Like, it's hard to explain. It's just a little bit over just to create that presence. So yeah, and then the output, it's been boosted. Or no, actually, tell a lie, it hasn't been boosted, it's on 0. So yeah, cool. And then we're going to do the same thing for the snare. Cool. So same sort of thing with this. This is, I don't like how it's come off the low end a little bit, so I'm just going to dial that off. Cool. Move a little bit there. So it's a little bit tinny for me once again. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to this EQ, and we're just going to boost that up just a little bit more. Cool. But as far as I'm concerned, that is the foundations of the bass drum and the snare drum. Now we're going to obviously put in our cymbals and our crashes. For the essence of time, I'm just going to really quickly do this. So essentially same sort of thing: EQ, compression, maybe a bit of saturation potentially. Depending on the cymbal, you might want to put a bit of de-esser on there, but we'll come back to that later on. So yeah, just starting with a hi-hat. Cool. Compression. Like I said, guys, just really quickly rushing through this. Hi-hat. There isn't a hi-hat, so let's make one. And then lastly, we're going to do the saturation, and then we'll do the same sort of thing for the cymbals. So there is a bit of cymbal silk there. We're just going to put that on and see how that sounds. Okay, just bring a little bit off that high end, and then cool. Then same sort of thing with the cymbals. That's not really a cymbal, but okay. Overheads maybe. Okay, that is pretty tragic, to be fair. Might have to add another cymbal in later. You know what, I'm not even going to bother wasting my time on that. Anyway, so then you've got this kind of more present drum kit going on, because you've obviously boosted the frequencies, so you've emphasized the higher on the cymbals, the low end you've emphasized on the kick, and then that kind of low mid boom, and then the kind of high mid frequency as well, going into high for the snare. Like, you've just basically elevated those frequencies, so when it, in context of the mix, it sounds a lot more impactful. So if we just play it one more time with everything. That kick drum needs to be a bit louder, hang on. Cool. So, look, I'm not going to go into depth on how to do every single thing in this video, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a starting point, guys, on how to mix drums. Obviously, you can do this with a lot of different layers. Obviously, toms. I haven't got any tom layers in here, but essentially, I'll show you exactly what that looks like from an EQ point of view. And compression, you follow the same method that we did in this video, where you sort of find it, think about the attacks and losing the bass signals and all that sort of stuff. So basically it looks like this. You're emphasizing around where the snare pops, dipping out in the mids, and then emphasizing the high. Personally, I wouldn't emphasize that much on a low tom. I probably would bring it more to about there, and then maybe this frequency is probably about right, and then potentially about there is like where it speaks to for me. But you know, it is relevant on the sound. There's no formula which is exactly the same for each recording, so yeah. But anyway, guys, I hope this has been somewhat insightful. If you want me to record anything in particular, like whether it be vocal mixing, how to mix a piano, how to master a song, like whatever, leave it a comment below and I shall do it. But otherwise, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, guys. Thank you, have a good one, and peace out. Bye bye.